The morning alarm echoed through the mining complex on Kepler 442b, and Dongwu stretched his arms before getting out of bed. Another day of supervising the extraction operations awaited him. He walked to the small window of his quarters and looked out at the massive mining machines already moving across the rocky landscape. The Veilthran overseers would arrive soon to check the daily reports. Dongwu had been on this planet for 3 years now. The work was hard, but he did it well. The aliens seemed pleased with his performance, always nodding their large heads when he presented the mining statistics. They called him a model human worker and sometimes patted his shoulder with their thick, blue hands. At the research facility on Proxima Station, Dr. Haijin was already at work in her laboratory. She carefully examined the alien plant samples that had arrived yesterday from the Outer Rim worlds. Her job was to catalog and study them for the Confederation's biological database. The work was interesting, but she had noticed something strange over the years. Many of the samples showed signs of intelligence that were not recorded in the official reports. She made detailed notes in her personal journal, separate from the official documentation. The journal was small and well hidden, but it contained observations that would have surprised her Veilthran supervisors. The plants seemed to respond to stimuli in ways that suggested complex thinking. Some even appeared to communicate with each other through chemical signals. Tae-Min worked in the communication center 3 levels below Haijin's lab. His days were spent maintaining the quantum relay systems that connected the research station to the rest of the Confederation. To anyone watching, he was just another human technician doing routine maintenance. But Tae-Min had spent years learning every detail of the communication systems. He knew which frequencies were monitored and which were not. He understood the encryption protocols better than most alien engineers. And most importantly, he had discovered ways to send messages through the system without anyone noticing. These messages traveled to other human workers across the galaxy, carrying information that would have shocked the Confederation leadership. On the capital world of Veilthros Prime, Subin attended another boring diplomatic meeting. As a cultural attaché, her job was to help alien diplomats understand human customs and behavior. She sat quietly in the corner of the Grand Council chamber, taking notes and answering questions when asked. The aliens talked freely about military strategies and political plans. They discussed which worlds to visit next and which species might pose problems. Subin listened carefully to every word, her memory recording details that most people would forget within hours. She had an exceptional ability to remember conversations, dates, and numbers after each meeting. Subin would return to her small office and write detailed reports. But these reports were not for her alien supervisors. They were encrypted messages that found their way to other humans through Tae-Min's communication network. The Confederation had existed for over 2,000 years. The Veilthran Empire controlled most of the government with their tall blue bodies and superior attitudes. They believed themselves to be the most intelligent species in the galaxy. Other alien races like the insect-like Korthek, the water-breathing Hydrones, and the crystal-formed Zenthrans all accepted Veilthran leadership. When humans were discovered 50 years ago, the Confederation decided they would make good workers. Humans were smart enough to handle complex tasks, but seemed to lack the ambition to challenge authority. They were perfect servants for the great galactic civilization. Thousands of humans now worked throughout Confederation space. They maintained mining operations, ran research facilities, and kept the vast technological systems functioning. The aliens were pleased with their human workers. They were reliable, efficient, and never caused trouble. What the aliens did not know was that humans had been talking to each other all along. J1 finished his inspection of the hyperspace relay station in the Kepler system. As the chief engineer, he was responsible for maintaining the communication equipment that connected 17 different star systems. The work required him to travel between stations regularly, giving him access to more of the galaxy than most humans ever saw. During his travels, J1 had made subtle modifications to the relay systems. Nothing that would be noticed during routine inspections, but changes that allowed human messages to hide within the normal communication traffic. He had created a secret network that connected human workers across hundreds of light years. The network carried more than just personal messages between friends and family. It shared technical information, observations about alien behavior, and slowly growing concerns about the true nature of the Confederation. Bo-Ram worked as a translator in the Confederation Council building. Her job was to help different alien species understand each other during important meetings. She was fluent in over a dozen alien languages and had a reputation for accuracy and discretion. The council members trusted her completely. They discussed sensitive military information, trade secrets, and political strategies right in front of her. To them, she was just a useful tool, like a computer or a communication device. They never considered that she might have her own opinions about what she heard. Bo-Ram had perfect memory for languages and conversations. Every detail of every meeting was stored in her mind. She knew the locations of military bases, the schedules of patrol fleets, and the political tensions between different alien species. All of this information slowly made its way through the human network. Min-Ho spent his days crawling through the maintenance tunnels of the Confederation dreadnought Eternal Victory. As a maintenance supervisor, he had access to every system on the massive warship. He knew where the power conduits ran, how the life support systems worked, and which components were most critical to the ship's operation. The alien crew members barely noticed him as he moved through the ship. To them, he was just another human worker keeping their vessel in good condition. They never realized that Min-Ho had memorized every critical system and identified dozens of ways to disable the ship if necessary. Min-Ho shared his knowledge through coded maintenance reports that were transmitted to other human workers on different ships. Slowly, humans throughout the Confederation fleet were learning the weaknesses of alien technology. The aliens believed they were in control. The Veilthrone saw themselves as benevolent rulers who provided guidance and structure to lesser species. They thought humans were grateful for the opportunity to serve such an advanced civilization, but humans saw things differently. They watched and learned and remembered everything. They built connections across the galaxy and shared information. That painted a very different picture of Confederation society. Dongwu finished his daily report and submitted it to Overlord Dexville, who barely glanced at the numbers before approving them. The Veilthrone was already thinking about his evening meal and did not notice the small smile on Dongwu's face. Dr. Haijin locked her personal journal in its hidden compartment and began preparing her official reports. Her discoveries about plant intelligence would never appear in Confederation databases, but they were carefully documented for other humans to read. Taemin completed his maintenance routines and sent another batch of hidden messages through the quantum relay network. Somewhere across the galaxy, other humans would receive information about alien technology and political developments. Subin attended her final meeting of the day and returned to her quarters with a head full of military secrets and diplomatic plans. Within hours, encrypted summaries would be traveling through hyperspace to human workers on distant worlds. The network grew stronger every day. Humans were patient people, and they understood the value of careful planning. They had learned to watch and wait and prepare for whatever might come next. The aliens thought they were in control, but they had no idea what was really happening in the shadows of their great civilization. J1 floated in zero gravity as he worked on the quantum relay array. The hyperspace communication station orbited a dead star in the Vega system, far from any inhabited worlds. This isolation made it perfect for his real work. While his hands moved through the routine maintenance procedures, his mind focused on the modifications he was making to the system, the encryption protocols that protected. Confederation communications were complex, but J1 had studied them for years. He understood how the quantum particles carried information across vast distances faster than light itself. More importantly, he had learned how to hide additional data streams within the normal communication flow. Every message that passed through this relay station now carried extra information. Human workers across 17 star systems could send reports, observations, and plans through channels that the aliens never monitored. The network was growing stronger every day. J1 finished his work and activated the new protocols. 2. Any alien inspector, the system would appear completely normal. The hidden channels were invisible unless someone knew exactly what to look for. He smiled as he thought about the messages that would soon flow through his modifications on the capital world. Beoram sat in the council chamber, listening to Admiral Kexthorn discuss fleet movements with the other military commanders, the insectoid. Korthik Admiral was explaining plans for a patrol sweep through the Outer Rim territories. Beoram translated his clicking speech for the Vaelthrin and Hydron representatives. The aliens talked about ship positions, patrol schedules, and defensive strategies as if she were not even there. They had grown so comfortable with human translators that they forgot these workers had minds of their own. Beoram memorized every detail while maintaining her expression of polite attention. After the meeting, she walked slowly back to her office, appearing to review her translation notes. But her mind was actually organizing the military information she had gathered. Fleet positions, patrol routes, communication frequencies, and weapon capabilities. All of it would be shared with other humans within hours. The small recording device hidden in her translator badge had captured every word of the meeting. The device was so tiny that even detailed security scans would miss it. J1 had designed it using technology borrowed from Confederation surveillance. Equipment.Beoram connected the device to her computer and began preparing the encrypted files. The information would travel through J1's hidden network to humans working on military bases, research stations, and civilian colonies throughout the galaxy. Dr. Eugene worked alone in her laboratory on Research Station Omega-7. The station orbited a gas giant in an uninhabited system, conducting surveys of potentially useful worlds. As the station's xenobiologist, Eugene studied samples from dozens of different planets. Her official job was to identify worlds that might be suitable for Confederation colonization or resource extraction. But Eugene had begun to notice disturbing patterns in the data she received. Many of the worlds showed clear signs of intelligent life, but these signs were being ignored or explained away in the official reports. She pulled up the survey data from Kepler 186f, a world that had been scheduled for mining operations. The biological samples showed complex tool use, organized agriculture, and even primitive art forms. Any reasonable scientist would conclude that the planet was inhabited by an intelligent species, but the official Confederation report listed the inhabitants as pre-sapient animals with instinctive behaviors that mimic intelligence. The planet had been cleared for resource extraction, which meant the destruction of the native civilization. Eugene felt sick as she realized what was happening. The Confederation was not just exploiting primitive worlds, they were deliberately lying about the intelligence of native species to justify genocide. She began searching through other survey reports, looking for similar patterns. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of worlds had been strip-mined after their intelligent inhabitants were classified as non-sapient. The Confederation had been committing systematic genocide for decades, maybe centuries. Eugene encrypted her findings and sent them through the human network. This information had to reach other humans immediately. They needed to know what kind of civilization they were serving. Eugene piloted his cargo ship through hyperspace between the Centauri and Volf systems. As an independent contractor, he carried supplies and equipment to human settlements throughout Confederation space. The aliens saw him as a useful transportation service. Nothing more. But Eugene's cargo holds contained more than just official supplies. Hidden compartments throughout his ship carried encrypted data storage devices, communication equipment, and even small weapons that had been carefully modified to avoid detection. His regular routes allowed him to visit dozens of human communities, delivering information and equipment that kept the network connected. Each stop included coded conversations with local human leaders who were quietly preparing for something that most aliens could not imagine. At his current destination, the mining colony on Volf 359b, Eugene met with the local human supervisor, a woman named So Young. She worked in the colony's administrative center, managing records and communications for the Vaelthrin overseer. So Young had access to the colony's complete database, including historical records that went back decades. She had been copying sensitive information and storing it on portable devices that Wu Jin carried to other human settlements. The records painted a clear picture of Confederation expansion and control. They showed how the aliens had conquered or absorbed hundreds of species over the centuries. They revealed the true extent of resource extraction from inhabited worlds. Most importantly, they demonstrated that the Confederation's power depended entirely on the cooperation of subject species. So Young handed Wu Jin the latest data compilation as they pretended to discuss cargo manifests. The information would reach human communities across the galaxy within weeks. Chao Min managed agricultural production for 6 different star systems from his office on the farming world of New Harvest. The Confederation depended on worlds like this to feed their vast population. Chang Min's job was to coordinate food shipments and ensure that quotas were met, but Chang Min had been making subtle changes to the distribution system. Extra food supplies were being diverted to human settlements. Storage facilities were being built in locations that were not recorded in official databases. Emergency supplies were being stockpiled on worlds throughout human space. The changes were small, enough to avoid notice, but they were part of a larger pattern. Humans throughout the Confederation were quietly redirecting resources and preparing for an uncertain future. Na-EUN worked in the Planetary Defense Center on Proxima Centauri b. Her job was to monitor sensor networks and coordinate patrol schedules for the system's security forces. She had access to detailed information about defensive capabilities, sensor coverage, and patrol routes. Na-Yun had been mapping the blind spots in the Confederation's surveillance network. She knew when and where ships could move without being detected. She understood which communication channels were monitored and which were ignored. This information was shared with other humans who might need to move people or supplies without alien knowledge. The Defense Center's database also contained detailed information about Confederation military technology. Nayun had been copying technical specifications for weapons, shields, and propulsion systems. Human engineers throughout the galaxy were studying these designs and looking for weaknesses. As the months passed, the human network grew more sophisticated. Information flowed freely between star systems. Resources were quietly redirected to human communities. Technical knowledge was shared and improved upon. The aliens remained completely unaware of what was happening. They saw humans as reliable workers who followed orders and never caused problems. They trusted their human employees with sensitive information and critical systems, but humans were watching everything. They were learning about alien technology, studying military capabilities, and mapping the true structure of Confederation power. They were also discovering the dark secrets that the aliens had hidden for centuries. The genocide revelations from Dr. Eugene had spread throughout the human network. Every human worker now knew that they were not serving a benevolent civilization. They were helping to maintain a system built on the destruction of intelligent species. This knowledge changed everything. Humans began to see their situation differently. They were not grateful servants of a superior civilization. They were prisoners who had been forced to become accomplices in genocide. The network carried more than just information now. It carried anger, determination, and a growing sense that something had to change. Humans throughout the galaxy were quietly asking the same question. How long could they continue to serve a system that they now knew was evil? The aliens thought they were in control, but they had created something they did not understand. They had given humans access to their most sensitive systems and secrets. They had placed human workers in positions where they could observe and learn and plan, most dangerously. They had underestimated the human capacity for patience and organization. They saw individual workers doing their assigned tasks. They did not see the vast network teach. Dr. Eugene stared at the data on her screen and felt her heart racing. The latest survey report from Kepler 438b contained information that made her stomach turn. The planet showed clear signs of an advanced civilization, cities, agriculture, technology, and art, but the official Confederation report classified the inhabitants as primitive animals. suitable for resource extraction. She had seen this pattern before, but this case was different. The biological samples from Kepler 438b included sophisticated tools, complex language recordings, and even mathematical equations carved into stone tablets. No honest scientist could look at this evidence and deny that the planet was home to an intelligent species. Eugene pulled up the extraction schedule. Mining operations were set to begin in 3 months. The entire planet would be strip mined for rare metals, completely destroying the native civilization. Millions of intelligent beings would die so the Confederation could harvest resources more efficiently. She accessed the secure human communication network and began composing an urgent message. This information had to reach every human worker in Confederation space immediately. They needed to know what they were really part of. The message traveled through J1's hidden channels, reaching human communities across dozens of star systems within hours. On mining worlds, research stations, military bases, and administrative centers, humans read Eugene's report with growing horror and anger. Dong-Wu received the message while reviewing mining reports on Kepler 442b. He had always suspected that something was wrong with Confederation expansion policies, but seeing the evidence laid out so clearly made him feel sick. How many intelligent species had already been destroyed? How many planets had been strip mined while their inhabitants were classified as animals? He looked out at the massive mining machines working across the planet's surface. Were there intelligent beings somewhere beneath the ground, trying to hide from the destruction above? Had his work contributed to genocide without his knowledge? The message included more than just information about Kepler 438b. Eugene had compiled evidence from dozens of other worlds that showed the same pattern. The Confederation had been systematically destroying intelligent species for centuries, always using the excuse that the victims were pre-sapient, and therefore had no rights. Te-Min read the report while maintaining the communication relays on Proxima Station. The technical details were horrifying, but what shocked him most was the scale of the cover-up. Thousands of scientists, administrators, and military officers had to be involved in classifying intelligent species as animals. The genocide was not an accident or a mistake. It was official policy. He began forwarding the information to every human in his contact network. Within hours, the data was spreading to human workers throughout the galaxy. The network that had been built for sharing routine information was now carrying the most important message in human history. Subin received Eugene's report while attending a diplomatic reception on the capital world. She excused herself from the gathering and found a private room where she could read the full document. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. She thought about all the military briefings she had attended, all the expansion plans she had translated, all the resource extraction schedules she had helped coordinate. Every one of those operations had probably involved the destruction of an intelligent species. She had been an unwitting accomplice to genocide on a galactic scale. Subin began composing her own report, adding political and military information to Eugene's scientific evidence. She described the casual attitude that Confederation leaders had toward primitive species. She shared conversations where alien officials had joked about clearing worlds for resource extraction. The network carried these messages to human workers on hundreds of worlds. Mining supervisors, research assistants, military technicians, and administrative clerks all learned the truth about the civilization they served. The reactions were immediate and intense. Wu Jin was traveling between star systems when he received the encrypted data package. He pulled his cargo ship out of hyperspace and read the entire report while floating in empty space between stars. The evidence was clear and devastating. He thought about all the cargo he had carried over the years, mining equipment, survey tools, and extraction machinery. How much of that equipment had been used to destroy intelligent civilizations? How many species had died because of supplies he had delivered? Wu Jin changed course and headed for the nearest human settlement. This information had to be shared in person, not just through digital networks. People needed to see the evidence and discuss what it meant for their future. At the agricultural center on New Harvest, Changmin read Eugene's report with growing Anger. He had been proud of his work feeding the Confederation's population. Now he realized that he had been supporting a system built on genocide and oppression. Chongmin began reviewing food distribution records with new eyes. How much of the grain and protein he managed went to feeding the crews of ships that destroyed intelligent species? How many Confederation colonies were built on the graves of murdered civilizations? He started making changes to the agricultural distribution system immediately. Food supplies that were meant for military operations began experiencing technical delays. Shipments to mining fleets encountered transportation problems. Meanwhile, extra supplies flowed to human settlements that were quietly preparing for independence. Na-EU Yoon received the report while monitoring Proxima Centauri's defense systems. She had always wondered why the Confederation needed such extensive military forces if they were really a peaceful alliance of species. Now she understood that the military existed to suppress any species that might resist. Confederation expansion. She began copying every piece of military intelligence she could access. Fleet positions, weapon capabilities, patrol schedules, and communication codes, all of it went into the human network. If humans were going to take action against the Confederation, they would need detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities. The report from Eugene had awakened something in the human network. What had started as a simple information-sharing system was now becoming something much more significant. Humans across the galaxy were asking the same questions. How could they continue to serve a system built on genocide? What could they do to stop the destruction of innocent species? Dr. Haijin read the report in her laboratory on Proxima Station. She had suspected for years that the Confederation was hiding evidence of intelligence in the species they studied. Now she had proof that the cover-up was systematic and deliberate. She began reviewing all of her own research with new perspective. How many intelligent species had she helped classify as animals? How many of her reports had been used to justify the destruction of civilizations? Haijin started copying every piece of biological data in the station's computers. Information about hundreds of species, including many that had been classified as pre-sapient, went into secure storage devices that would be shared through the human network. BO-RAM received Eugene's message while preparing translation notes for the next council meeting. The evidence of systematic genocide made her think about all the military discussions she had translated. The casual way that alien leaders talked about clearing worlds for resources now made horrible sense. She began preparing a comprehensive report on Confederation military operations, using information from hundreds of meetings she had attended. The report would include strategic plans, resource allocation, and detailed information about ongoing genocide operations. The human network was evolving rapidly. What had been a passive information-sharing system was becoming an active resistance. Organization. Humans throughout the galaxy were quietly sabotaging operations, redirecting resources, and preparing for some kind of action against the Confederation. Min-Ho read Eugene's report while crawling through maintenance tunnels on the Dreadnought. Eternal victory? The evidence of genocide made him think about the ship's mission in a completely new way. This vessel was not protecting innocent species. It was helping to destroy them. He began documenting every weakness he could find in the ship's systems. Critical power relays, life support vulnerabilities, and communication system flaws. All of it went into detailed reports that were shared with humans on other military vessels. The network now carried more than information. It carried plans, preparations, and a growing sense of purpose. Humans throughout the galaxy were quietly getting ready for something that most of them could not yet name. Eugene's revelation had changed everything. Humans could no longer pretend that they were innocent workers serving a benevolent civilization. They were accomplices to genocide, and that knowledge demanded action. The aliens remained completely unaware of what was happening. They continued to trust their human workers with sensitive information and critical systems. They had no idea that their most reliable employees were now their most dangerous enemies. In research stations, mining facilities, military bases, and Administrative centers, humans went about their daily tasks while secretly preparing for revolution. The network that connected them had become something the aliens could not understand or control. The Watchers had discovered the truth, and they would never be the same again. Haiyan-Wu floated through the zero-gravity construction bay, watching human workers assemble hull sections in perfect silence. To any observer, this looked like a routine mining operation inside a hollowed-out asteroid. The Confederation inspectors, who visited twice a year, saw exactly what they expected to see: humans extracting valuable metals from worthless rock. They never looked closely at the metal being extracted. They never noticed that the mining tunnels formed the perfect framework for a massive starship. They never realized that the humans were not taking materials out of the asteroid. They were building something inside it. The Kepler Prime shipyards had been operating for 15 years, officially processing raw materials for Confederation construction projects. Haiyan-Wu had carefully diverted resources from dozens of legitimate operations, creating a supply chain that existed entirely within the human network. Every component needed for starship construction was slowly accumulated and transported to the hidden facilities. Engine parts came from repair operations on Confederation vessels. Hull materials were diverted from mining operations. Life support systems were assembled from components ordered for different projects across multiple star systems. The work was painfully slow, but it was also completely invisible to alien oversight. Each individual transaction was too small to notice. Each diverted component was explained by routine maintenance or operational requirements. The Confederation's own bureaucracy helped hide the project by making it impossible for any single official to see the complete picture. Haiyan-Wu reviewed the construction schedule on his personal tablet. They now had 12 asteroid ships in various stages of completion. Each vessel could carry 10,000 people and their essential supplies. The ships were designed for long-range travel and could operate independently for decades. But building ships was only part of the preparation. The human network had been evolving beyond simple information sharing. Communities throughout Confederation space were quietly organizing themselves for evacuation. June taught primary school on the agricultural world of New Terra. Her students were children of human farmers, technicians, and administrators who kept the planet's food production systems running. To alien supervisors, she was just another human teacher providing basic education to worker families. But Ji-Yun's curriculum included subjects that no alien would have approved. Her students learned about human history before the Confederation. They studied languages, cultures, and traditions that the aliens considered irrelevant. Most importantly, they learned about organization, cooperation, and self-reliance. Ji-Yun had been coordinating with parents throughout the colony, preparing them for evacuation without ever using that word directly. Families practiced emergency drills that taught them to pack essential supplies quickly. Children learned camping skills that would help them survive in temporary shelters. Everyone participated in community exercises that were actually rehearsals for mass evacuation. The network had provided detailed evacuation plans for every human settlement. Routes were mapped, supplies were stockpiled, and transportation was arranged. Everything was disguised as routine preparation for natural disasters or equipment failures. Seok-jin worked in the Confederation's Advanced Technology Research Center. On Vega Prime, his official job was to maintain and calibrate sensitive equipment used by alien scientists. But Seok-jin and his team of human technicians had been secretly studying every piece of technology they encountered. Over the years, they had reverse-engineered Confederation hyperspace drives, shield generators, life support systems, and communication equipment. They understood how the technology worked and had begun making improvements to the original designs. The improved designs were shared through the human network and incorporated into the construction projects at hidden facilities like Haiyan-Wu's asteroid shipyards. Human ships would be faster, more efficient, and more reliable than their Confederation counterparts. Seok-jin had also been working on something more dangerous: weapons technology. The humans had no intention of starting a war with the Confederation. but they needed to be able to defend themselves if necessary. He had designed defensive systems that could disable alien ships without destroying them. The weapon designs were distributed to human engineers throughout the galaxy. Every hidden facility now had the capability to protect itself if discovered by Confederation forces. EU and G managed the evacuation preparations for the entire New Harvest colony. As a senior administrator, she had access to population records, supply inventories, and transportation schedules. She used this access to organize the most complex logistical operation in human history. Every human on New Harvest had been assigned to an evacuation group. Each group had specific routes, schedules, and destinations. Supplies were pre-positioned along evacuation routes. Transportation was arranged through a network of human-operated vessels that officially carried routine cargo. The preparations were hidden within normal administrative activities. Safety drills taught people their evacuation procedures. Inventory management ensured that essential supplies were available when needed. Transportation planning arranged for ships to be in the right places at the right times. EU and G communicated regularly with human administrators on other worlds. Similar preparations were taking place throughout Confederation space. Hundreds of human communities were getting ready to disappear simultaneously. The timeline for evacuation was set by events beyond human control. Dr. Eugen's intelligence network had discovered that the Confederation was planning a major expansion operation. Dozens of worlds with intelligent life were scheduled for development. Over the next 2 years, the humans could not prevent this genocide, but they could refuse to participate in it. The evacuation would begin before the expansion operation started, ensuring that no human workers would be available to support the destruction of innocent species. Kyung-Su worked in the Confederation Council building, maintaining the computer systems that stored the government's most sensitive information. He had spent years copying files, communication records, and classified documents that proved the extent of Confederation crimes. The evidence collection was now complete. Kyung-Su had documented genocide operations going back over 3 centuries. He had records of systematic cover-ups, falsified scientific reports, and deliberate misclassification of intelligent species. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. All of this information had been compiled into a comprehensive database that would be transmitted to every major news organization, scientific institution, and government in Confederation space. The transmission would occur simultaneously with the human evacuation, ensuring that the evidence could not be suppressed or destroyed. Deus served aboard the Confederation flagship Eternal Dominion as a maintenance supervisor. She had access to every system on the massive battleship and had spent years documenting its capabilities and weaknesses, but Dae-Yoon had also been preparing something more subtle. She had written detailed maintenance manuals and operational procedures for every critical system on the ship. The manuals were clear, comprehensive, and completely accurate. When the human evacuation began, Dae-Yoon would leave these manuals behind. The alien crew would be able to keep their ship functioning, but they would struggle without human technical expertise. The manuals were a gesture of goodwill, showing that humans bore no malice toward their former masters. Similar preparations were taking place on ships throughout the Confederation fleet. Human workers were documenting their procedures and leaving behind instructions that would help alien crews manage without them. The human network had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. Hundreds of thousands of people were coordinating their actions across dozens of star systems. The logistics were staggering, but the organization was perfect. Communication flowed through J1's hidden channels, carrying updates, instructions, and coordination messages. Resources moved through Changlin's agricultural networks and Wujin's transportation systems. Intelligence flowed through the reports of observers like Subin and Bioram. Everything was synchronized and ready. The evacuation could begin within days of the final authorization signal. The aliens remained completely unaware of what was happening around them. They saw human workers performing their duties with the same reliability they had always shown. They noticed nothing unusual in the routine activities of their most trusted employees, Overlord. Vexville reviewed mining reports from Dongwu with his usual casual attention. Admiral Kexthorn listened to Bioram's translations without suspecting that she was memorizing military secrets. Research Director Vexhai relied on Haijin's biological surveys without knowing that she was copying classified information. The Confederation's greatest strength had become its greatest weakness. Their absolute confidence in human loyalty had made them blind to human capabilities. They had given their servants access to everything, never imagining that those servants might have plans of their own. The network was ready. The ships were built. The routes were planned. The evidence was compiled. The evacuation procedures were rehearsed and perfected. All that remained was the decision to leave. That decision was made for them when news arrived of the Kepler 438b mining operation. The evacuation began on a Tuesday at exactly 0600 Confederation Standard Time, across 127 star systems. Human workers simply failed to report for their shifts. Mining operations fell silent. Research facilities powered down. Communication arrays stopped transmitting. The vast machinery of the Confederation began grinding to a halt. Overlord Dexville arrived at the Kepler 442b mining facility expecting to review the daily production reports with Dongwu. Instead, he found empty offices and silent machinery. The mining complex was completely deserted, but nothing had been damaged or destroyed. Equipment sat exactly where it should be. Computer terminals displayed normal operational data. Even the coffee in the break room was still warm. Lexville walked through the facility in growing confusion. Where were the human workers? Why had the mining operations stopped? He tried to access the communication system to contact other facilities, but the complex quantum network refused to respond to his commands. The mining supervisor's office was neat and organized. Dongwu's desk contained detailed maintenance schedules for all equipment, complete operational procedures, and even helpful notes about potential problems. Everything a replacement supervisor would need was carefully documented and easily accessible, but Dongwu himself was gone. Along with every other human on the planet, similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On Proxima Station, Dr. Haijin's laboratory was found empty but perfectly organized. Her research notes were up to date, her equipment was properly calibrated, and her samples were correctly stored. The only thing missing was the researcher herself, Tate Min's communication center had been left in immaculate condition. Every system was functioning normally, but the complex quantum modifications he had made to the networks were now incomprehensible to alien technicians. The communication arrays worked, but no one understood how to maintain or modify them. On the capital world, Subin's office in the diplomatic quarter was discovered empty by her Velthran supervisor. Her translation equipment was neatly arranged, her language databases were complete, and her schedule was carefully organized. But Subin had vanished without explanation. The pattern was identical everywhere. Humans had disappeared, but they had left behind everything that belonged to the Confederation. Tools, equipment, personal items purchased with Confederation credits, even the uniforms they had worn to work. Everything remained behind. More disturbing was what the humans had taken with them. They had somehow evacuated hundreds of thousands of people without using any registered transportation. No Confederation ships were missing. No commercial vessels had filed flight plans for human destinations. Yet entire communities had vanished overnight. Admiral Kexthorn discovered the scope of the disappearance when he tried to contact the human translator Beoram for an urgent military briefing. Not only was Beoram missing, but human workers throughout. The military command structure had vanished simultaneously. The admiral's personal aide, a reliable human named Teho, was gone. The communication technicians who maintained the military networks had disappeared. Even the maintenance crews who kept the warships functioning had vanished without warning. Kexthorn tried to access the military communication systems and found them unresponsive. The networks were operational, but the control protocols were locked behind encryption that no alien technician could break. Years of human modifications to the systems had made them dependent on human expertise. The disappearance was not random or chaotic. It was clearly planned and executed with precision that shocked the alien leadership. Every human in Confederation space had vanished at the same moment, suggesting coordination on an impossible scale. War Commander Vextai arrived at the Eternal Dominion to find the massive battleship operating normally but with no human crew members aboard. The ship's maintenance supervisor, Daiyun, had left behind comprehensive manuals for every critical system. The documentation was clear and detailed, but it could not replace years of experience and expertise the ship's alien crew tried to perform routine maintenance procedures and quickly discovered how dependent they had become on human technical skills. Systems that had always worked flawlessly now developed mysterious problems. Equipment that had never required attention suddenly needed constant adjustment. Most frustrating was the ship's communication array. The quantum encryption protocols were so complex that only the human technicians had fully understood them. Without those technicians, the ship could send and receive basic messages, but sophisticated military communications were impossible. Similar problems were developing throughout the Confederation fleet. Warships found themselves operating with reduced capabilities. Supply vessels struggled to maintain their complex logistical systems. Even civilian transports began experiencing technical difficulties as their human crew members failed to report for duty. The economic impact was immediate and severe. Mining operations that had run smoothly for decades suddenly stopped producing. Agricultural worlds that had fed entire star systems found their distribution networks collapsing. Manufacturing facilities that had operated with perfect efficiency began experiencing cascading system failures. Changmin's agricultural networks on New Harvest had been designed and maintained by human expertise. Without that expertise, the complex distribution systems began failing almost immediately. Food shipments that should have reached the core worlds never left the farming planets. Storage facilities that had operated automatically for years began malfunctioning. The Confederation's leadership called emergency meetings to address the crisis. But even these meetings were disrupted by the human disappearance. Translators who had facilitated communication between different species were gone. Administrative assistants who had managed complex schedules and procedures had vanished. Even the maintenance crews who kept the government buildings functioning had disappeared. Research Director Vex Hai tried to access the biological databases that Dr. Haijin had maintained. The data was all there, but it was organized in ways that only she had understood. Years of subtle modifications and improvements had made the systems dependent on human knowledge and expertise. Worse, many of the research projects had been designed and executed by human scientists working under alien supervision. Without those researchers, the projects ground to a halt. Equipment that had always functioned perfectly began developing problems that no alien technician could solve. The hyperspace communication networks that connected the Confederation began experiencing failures and disruptions. J1's modifications to the quantum relay systems had made them more efficient and reliable than ever before. But those same modifications were now incomprehensible to alien engineers. Messages that should have taken hours to transmit now took days. Communication protocols that had worked flawlessly for years began producing garbled data. The network that held the Confederation together was slowly falling apart. On the third day after the disappearance, a single message arrived at the Confederation Council chambers. It came through official channels but was encrypted with protocols that no alien could break. The message was addressed to the full council and marked as highest priority. Kyung-soo had left the message behind when he evacuated the capital world. It contained a complete database of evidence documenting Confederation war crimes going back over 3 centuries. The evidence included classified reports, communication records, scientific data, and testimony from thousands of witnesses. The database proved that the Confederation had systematically destroyed intelligent species throughout their expansion. It showed that scientific reports had been falsified to justify genocide. It documented cover-ups, conspiracies, and crimes against sapient life on a scale that shocked even the most Cynical alien officials. The message also contained an explanation for the human disappearance. It was written in simple, clear language that any alien could understand. We cannot continue to serve a system built on genocide. We cannot be party to the destruction of innocent life. We bear no hatred toward any species, but we will not be accomplices to murder. We leave behind everything that belongs to the Confederation. We take only what belongs to us, our freedom and our dignity. We wish you peace, but we will not help you make war. The message was signed simply, the Human Network. The aliens finally understood what had happened. The reliable, obedient human workers they had trusted for 50 years had been watching, learning, and planning. They had built a secret organization that spanned the entire Confederation. They had coordinated the largest evacuation in Galactic history without anyone noticing the preparations. Most shocking of all, they had accomplished this feat without violence or theft. They had simply chosen to leave, taking nothing that did not belong to them and leaving behind detailed instructions to help their former masters function without them. The Confederation leadership faced a terrible realization. Their entire civilization had become dependent on the species they had considered inferior. Without human workers, their technology failed, their economy collapsed, and their military capabilities were severely compromised. The humans had won the most devastating victory possible. They had not destroyed their enemies, they had simply walked away, leaving the aliens to discover how completely they had relied on the servants' deaths. The Confederation Council Chamber had never seen chaos like this. Representatives from dozens of species shouted at each other in their native languages, while translation systems struggled to keep up, without human translators to manage the complex linguistic protocols. Communication between species had become clumsy and unreliable. Overlord Thexville stood at the central podium trying to restore order, but his voice was lost in the din of angry aliens demanding answers. The Velthran Empire's authority was crumbling as subject. Species realized how completely their civilization had depended on human labor. The initial response had been denial. Surely the humans would return once they realized they could not survive without Confederation protection. They were just simple workers who had been manipulated by troublemakers. The disappearance would last a few days at most, but days turned into weeks, and the humans did not return. Instead, the Confederation's problems grew worse every day. Technology failed without human maintenance. Supply chains collapsed without human coordination. Even basic services began breaking down as systems designed by human expertise became incomprehensible to alien operators. Admiral Kexthorn reported that the military was operating at less than 60% capacity. Warships could still fly and fight, but their complex systems required constant attention from technicians who no longer existed. Communication between vessels was unreliable. Maintenance schedules were falling behind. Several ships had been forced to return to port with equipment failures that no alien engineer could repair. The economic situation was even worse. Mining operations throughout Confederation space had shut down completely. The aliens could operate the heavy machinery, but they could not maintain the complex extraction and processing systems that humans had designed and improved over decades. Research Director Vexhai admitted that most scientific research had ground to a halt. The biological databases were intact but incomprehensible without human interpretation. Equipment that had worked perfectly for years now produced unreliable results. Worst of all, many critical research projects had been designed by human scientists, whose knowledge could not be replaced. The agricultural crisis was threatening to cause famine on several core worlds. Food production had dropped by 70%, as distribution networks designed by human experts collapsed. Warehouses full of grain sat useless, because no one understood the complex routing systems that moved food throughout Confederation space. But the most shocking discovery came from the intelligence services. As alien investigators tried to understand how the humans had coordinated their disappearance, they uncovered the true scope of the human network. Chief Intelligence Officer Raxvel presented his findings to the stunned council. The humans had been operating a secret communication system for decades, using modifications to Confederation networks that were so subtle they had never been detected. They had shared information across the entire galaxy and coordinated their activities with precision that put Confederation intelligence services to shame. Even more disturbing was the evidence that humans had been copying sensitive information. For years, military secrets, political plans, scientific data, and classified government communications had all been systematically collected and shared throughout the human network. The aliens realized they had no secrets left. Every strategic plan, every military capability, every political weakness was known to the departed humans. Their former servants knew more about Confederation capabilities than most alien officials did. The investigation also revealed the existence of the hidden shipyards. Scout ships had found the asteroid facilities where humans had been building their evacuation fleet. The engineering was impressive, using modified Confederation technology that was actually superior to the original designs. The alien investigators were shocked by the scale of the operation. 12 massive ships had been constructed using resources diverted from legitimate Confederation projects. The theft had been so subtle and well coordinated that no individual transaction had been large enough to notice. Most humbling was the realization that the humans had been planning their escape for decades while maintaining the appearance of loyal service. They had worked diligently at their assigned tasks while secretly preparing to abandon their masters. The evidence database that Kyung-Soo had left behind was causing political upheaval throughout Confederation space. Subject species were learning about the systematic genocide that had built the Confederation's power. Worlds that had been classified as primitive were revealed to have hosted intelligent civilizations that were deliberately destroyed. The Korthek hives were the first to break away from the Confederation. Their insectoid representatives declared that they could not remain part of a government built on genocide. Within days, 3 Korthek star systems had declared independence and begun expelling. Confederation officials. The Hydrone Collective followed suit, withdrawing their support from Confederation military operations and closing their worlds to alien vessels. The aquatic species had always been uncomfortable with Confederation expansion policies, and the evidence of systematic genocide gave them the excuse they needed to leave. Even some Veilfern colonies began questioning the Empire's authority. The revelation that their government had been lying about genocide for centuries undermined the moral authority that justified their rule over other species. War Commander Vextai proposed a military solution to the crisis. If the humans could be found and forced to return, the Confederation could restore its former power. He recommended launching a massive search operation to locate the human fleet and compel their cooperation. The proposal was approved despite objections from more moderate council members. A fleet of 200 warships was assembled under Admiral Kexthorn's command, with orders to find the humans and negotiate their return to Confederation space. But the search operation faced immediate problems. The humans had vanished so completely that no trace of their passage could be found. Their ships had left no detectable hyperspace signatures. Their destinations were unknown. Even their technology was unfamiliar to Confederation scientists who tried to analyze the abandoned shipyard facilities. The search fleet spent months scanning empty star systems and following false leads. They found no sign of human colonies, no evidence of human activity, and no clues about where the vast evacuation fleet had gone. Worse, the search operation was plagued by equipment failures and communication problems. Ships that had operated reliably for years began experiencing mysterious malfunctions. Systems that had always worked perfectly now required constant attention from technicians who lacked the expertise to properly maintain them. Several warships were forced to return to port with engine problems. Others suffered life support failures that endangered their crews. The mighty Confederation fleet was discovering that it could not function effectively without human technical support. Meanwhile, the crisis at home continued to worsen. Food shortages were becoming critical on several worlds. Manufacturing had slowed to a crawl as complex automated systems failed without human oversight. Even basic infrastructure was beginning to break down. The Confederation's economy was in freefall. Trade between star systems had dropped to a fraction of its former level as transportation networks collapsed. Currency values fluctuated wildly as financial systems designed by human experts became unreliable. Social unrest was spreading as subject. Species realized how completely they had been deceived about Confederation history. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds as populations learned about the genocide that had been committed in their name. The Veilthran government tried to suppress the evidence database that Kyung-Soo had released, but the information was spreading faster than they could contain it. Every attempt at censorship only convinced more species that the allegations were true. Chief Administrator Nexthul attempted to restore public confidence by promising that the Confederation would reform its policies and make amends for past crimes. But these promises rang hollow when the government could barely keep basic services functioning. The truth was becoming impossible to deny. The Confederation had become so dependent on human labor that it could not function without it. The species they had considered inferior had been the foundation that supported their entire civilization. Without human workers, the mighty Confederation was revealed to be a hollow shell. Their technology was too complex for them to maintain. Their economy was too sophisticated for them to manage. Their empire was too vast for them to administer. The humans had achieved the impossible. They had defeated a galactic empire without firing a single shot. They had won their freedom without violence or destruction. They had exposed the truth without betraying confidences or breaking oaths. Most devastatingly, they had done it all while maintaining the appearance of loyal service. Right up until the moment they chose to leave, the aliens were finally beginning to understand the true nature of the species they had underestimated for 50 years. Humans were not simple workers who followed orders without question. They were patient, intelligent, and capable of organization on a scale that put galactic empires to shame. The search for the human fleet continued, but it was becoming clear that the humans did not want to be found. They had vanished into the VA. Admiral Kexthorn stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the tactical display that showed nothing but empty space. 3 months of searching had produced no trace of the human fleet. 200 of the Confederation's most advanced warships had scoured dozens of star systems. Without finding a single clue about where the humans had gone, the search operation was becoming a disaster. Ships that had operated flawlessly for years were breaking down with increasing frequency. The warship Eternal Victory had suffered a complete engine failure and was limping back to port with half its systems offline. The cruiser Star Dominion had lost life support for 6 hours before alien engineers managed to restore it using maintenance manuals left behind by human technicians. Most frustrating was the communication breakdown between vessels. The quantum encryption protocols that human technicians had maintained were gradually degrading without proper oversight. Ships could still communicate, but the sophisticated tactical coordination that made fleet operations possible was becoming increasingly unreliable. Chief Engineer Raxvel reported that they were losing critical systems faster than they could be repaired. The humans didn't just maintain our equipment, he explained to the Admiral. They improved it constantly. Without their modifications and adjustments, our technology is reverting to its original specifications. The problem was that the original specifications were often inadequate for current operations. Human engineers had spent decades making subtle improvements to Confederation technology. They had increased efficiency, improved reliability, and added capabilities that were now being lost as systems returned to their factory settings back on the capital world. The situation was growing desperate. Food shortages had become critical. As agricultural distribution networks continued to collapse, manufacturing output had dropped to 30% of normal levels. Even basic services like water treatment and power generation were becoming unreliable. The Confederation government was forced to implement rationing and emergency protocols not seen since the early days of galactic expansion. Citizens who had enjoyed unlimited access to resources were now learning what scarcity meant. War Commander Vextai proposed a radical solution. They would capture human communities from other galaxies or force the separated human populations to return through threats and coercion. But intelligence reports revealed a shocking truth. There were no human communities outside Confederation space. The species had been confined to Confederation territory. Since their discovery 50 years ago, the humans had somehow evacuated their entire population without leaving a single community behind. This suggested planning and coordination on a scale that the aliens were only beginning to understand. The investigation into human activities before the evacuation revealed disturbing patterns. Human workers had been systematically copying sensitive information for decades. Military plans, scientific data, political communications, and economic forecasts had all been shared throughout the human network. Intelligence officer Zexi discovered that humans had been conducting their own census and population tracking independent of Confederation records. They had known exactly how many humans lived in each system and had planned evacuation routes for every community. Most shocking was the evidence that humans had been conducting long-range surveys beyond Confederation space. Ships that had officially been carrying routine cargo had actually been exploring uninhabited star systems and mapping potential destinations for the evacuation fleet. The humans had been planning their escape for decades while maintaining perfect loyalty to their alien masters. They had worked diligently at their assigned tasks while secretly preparing for independence. Admiral Kexthorn expanded the search operation to include systems beyond Confederation space. If the humans had fled to uninhabited regions, they might be establishing colonies in unexplored territory. But even this expanded search produced no results. The human fleet had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. No hyperspace signatures, no energy emissions, no communication signals. Nothing that would indicate where hundreds of thousands of people had gone. The search operation was also hampered by continuing equipment failures. The destroyer Swift Strike suffered a complete power failure that left it drifting in space for 2 days. The battleship Iron Will lost its navigation systems and had to be guided back to port by escort vessels. Most disturbing were the failures in systems that had never required human maintenance. Equipment that had been designed and built entirely by alien engineers was beginning to malfunction in ways that suggested subtle sabotage. Investigation revealed that human workers had been making improvements to alien-designed systems for years. These modifications had been so subtle and beneficial that they had never been questioned. But now those same modifications were causing cascading failures as systems tried to operate without human oversight. The humans had not sabotaged Confederation technology. They had made it dependent on their continued presence. Every improvement, every modification, every adjustment had been designed to work perfectly as long as human technicians were available to maintain it. Chief Technology Officer Vaxtel admitted that they no longer understood their own equipment. The humans didn't just fix our technology, he reported to the emergency council session. They integrated themselves into it. Our systems have evolved to require human input at every level. The economic crisis was accelerating as the full scope of human integration became apparent. Humans had not just operated Confederation systems, they had redesigned them over decades to be more efficient and productive. Without human management, economic output was plummeting toward pre-human levels. The mining operations on former human worlds provided a particularly stark example. When Confederation engineers tried to restart the extraction facilities on Kepler 442b, they discovered that the equipment had been extensively modified. The improvements made the operations more efficient, but they also made them incomprehensible. To alien operators, Overlord Thexville personally supervised attempts to restore mining operations, but production remained at less than 20% of previous levels. The complex extraction and processing systems that had operated smoothly under human supervision now required constant attention and frequent repairs. Similar problems were occurring throughout Confederation space. Agricultural worlds that had fed entire star systems were producing barely enough food for local consumption. Manufacturing facilities that had operated at peak efficiency were struggling to meet basic production quotas, the social and political consequences were becoming severe. Subject species throughout the Confederation were questioning their loyalty to a government that could no longer provide basic services. The evidence of genocide released by the Human Network had already damaged Confederation credibility, and the ongoing crisis was making things worse. The Korthak hives formally withdrew from the Confederation and began establishing their own interstellar alliance. The Hydron Collective followed suit, taking their advanced manufacturing capabilities with them. Even some Velthrin colonies were declaring independence from the Empire. The Great Confederation that had ruled the galaxy for millennia was fragmenting as member species lost confidence in Velthrin leadership. The revelation of systematic genocide had destroyed moral authority, and the inability to function without human workers had destroyed practical authority. Admiral Kexthorn received orders to expand the search operation even further, but he was running out of functional ships. Nearly half of his fleet was either in repair or operating with reduced capabilities. The remaining vessels were showing signs of stress as alien crews struggled to maintain complex systems they did not fully understand. The Admiral faced a terrible choice: continue the search with a deteriorating fleet or return to port and admit failure. Either option would demonstrate the Confederation's weakness and encourage further defections by member species. Intelligence reports suggested that the human evacuation had been even more comprehensive than initially believed. Every human settlement, research station, and individual worker had disappeared simultaneously. The coordination required for such an operation was beyond anything the Confederation had thought possible. The aliens were beginning to realize that they had fundamentally misunderstood human nature. The species they had considered simple and obedient was actually capable of planning and organization that surpassed anything in galactic history. The humans had achieved something that no military conquest could accomplish. They had brought a galactic empire to its knees without violence, without theft, and without breaking any laws. They had simply chosen to leave, and that choice had exposed the hollow foundation of Confederation power. As the search operation continued without success, a disturbing possibility began to emerge. Perhaps the humans did not want to be found. Perhaps they had planned not just an evacuation, but a complete disappearance. Perhaps they had found a way to exist beyond the reach of any galactic power. The hunt for the human fleet was becoming a search for ghosts. The aliens were pursuing an enemy who had already won the war by refusing to fight it. They were trying to recapture servants who had proven themselves to be the true masters of the civilization they had chosen to abandon. 5 years had passed since the Great Departure, and Fleet Admiral Dongwu stood on the observation deck of New Terra watching construction crews assemble another habitat module. The massive Ark ship had grown from a hollowed asteroid into a thriving city that housed 50,000 humans and their new allies. The human fleet had found its destination in the void between galaxies, far from any star system that the Confederation might think to search. Here, in the cosmic darkness, they had built something unprecedented, a mogul civilization that owed nothing to any planetary government or galactic empire. The 12 original Ark ships had been joined by dozens of smaller vessels constructed from materials harvested from rogue asteroids and derelict spacecraft found drifting in the intergalactic void. The fleet was completely self-sufficient, with manufacturing facilities, agricultural modules, research laboratories, and living spaces for over 500,000 inhabitants. Dr. Haijin supervised the biological research division from her laboratory aboard the science vessel Discovery. Her team included not just human scientists, but researchers from 17 different species that had chosen to join the human exodus. Many were refugees from worlds that the Confederation had scheduled for development. The Kepler 438b survivors had been among the first to join the human fleet. When Confederation mining operations destroyed their planet, a small group of their people had escaped in primitive spacecraft. The humans found them drifting in deep space and welcomed them aboard. The Ark ships. Similar refugee groups had joined the fleet over the years. The Zephyrians, whose homeworld had been strip-mined for rare metals, The celestial whales whose space habitat had been destroyed to make room for a Confederation military base. The silicon gardens whose crystalline cities had been harvested. For their unique materials, each refugee species brought knowledge, skills, and perspectives that enriched the human community. The fleet had become a mobile alliance of free peoples united by their refusal to accept oppression. Te-Min managed the communication networks that connected the scattered vessels of the fleet. His systems were far more sophisticated than anything the Confederation had possessed, using quantum entanglement principles that human scientists had developed independently of alien technology. The communication network served a dual purpose. It connected the human fleet internally, but it also monitored communications throughout known space. The humans kept track of developments in the galaxy they had left behind. Though they made no attempt to contact their former masters, the reports were disturbing but not surprising. The Confederation was fragmenting as member species declared independence and formed their own alliances. The Veilthran Empire still controlled the core worlds, but their authority was challenged constantly by rebellions and defections. Economic collapse continued as technology failed without human maintenance. Food shortages had become chronic on many worlds as agricultural systems deteriorated. Manufacturing output had stabilized at about half of pre-Exodus levels, but quality control remained poor without human oversight. The political situation was even worse. The evidence of systematic genocide that the humans had released continued to spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring rebellions and independence movements on dozens of worlds. Species that had accepted Confederation rule for centuries were now questioning everything they had been told about galactic history. Subin worked with representatives from the refugee species to coordinate the fleet's diplomatic initiatives. Though the humans had chosen isolation, they were not completely cut off from galactic affairs. They maintained contact with resistance movements and provided support to species that were fighting for independence. The support was carefully limited to avoid provoking direct confrontation with Confederation forces. The humans shared technology, provided communication networks, and offered sanctuary to refugees, but they did not engage in military actions against their former masters. The human philosophy had evolved during their years in exile. They believed in freedom and self-determination for all intelligent species, but they also believed in nonviolence and non-interference. They would help those who asked for assistance, but they would not impose their values on others. This approach had produced remarkable results. The network of independent species that the humans supported had grown to include over 40 different civilizations. These species traded with each other, shared technology, and provided mutual defense without the need for a central government or imperial authority. The contrast with the dying Confederation was stark. While the Veilthran Empire struggled to maintain control through force and intimidation, the human-supported alliance thrived through cooperation and mutual respect. Wu Jin commanded a small fleet of exploration vessels that ventured beyond the main human fleet to search for new resources and investigate interesting cosmic phenomena. His ships had discovered several rogue planets that provided raw materials for the fleet's manufacturing operations. More importantly, his explorers had found evidence of other galactic civilizations beyond the reach of the Confederation. Ancient ruins on derelict worlds suggested that intelligent life had once flourished in regions that were now empty space. The humans were not the first species to flee from galactic empires. The exploration program was preparing for humanity's next great journey. The intergalactic void was safe, but it was also limiting. The human population was growing, and they would eventually need more space and resources than the fleet could provide. Surveys had identified several promising galaxies within reach of human technology. These distant star clusters appeared to be uninhabited by spacefaring civilizations, offering the possibility of peaceful colonization without conflict with established powers. The decision to leave the Milky Way entirely was still years away, but preparations were already beginning. New ships were being designed for intergalactic travel. Resource stockpiles were being expanded. The fleet's population was being educated about the challenges and opportunities that awaited them in distant galaxies. Changmin supervised agricultural production across the fleet's farming vessels. The mobile civilization was completely self-sufficient in food production, using advanced hydroponic systems and protein synthesis technologies that surpassed anything the Confederation had developed. The agricultural ships were also laboratories for developing new food production techniques that could support human expansion into distant galaxies. Teams of scientists worked to create crops that could thrive in alien environments and develop protein sources that did not require planetary ecosystems. The work was challenging, but rewarding. The humans had proven that they could create a thriving civilization without exploiting other species or destroying natural environments. Their mobile society was sustainable, equitable, and peaceful in ways that the Confederation had never achieved. Nayun coordinated the fleet's defensive systems from the command ship's security center. Though the humans had chosen nonviolence, they were not defenseless. Their ships were equipped with sophisticated shields and weapons that could disable attacking vessels without destroying them. The defensive philosophy reflected human values. They would protect themselves and their allies, but they would not seek conquest or revenge. If the Confederation fleet ever found them, the humans would defend their freedom, but they would not pursue their attackers or seek to destroy their former masters. This approach had been tested twice over the years. Confederation patrol vessels had stumbled across evidence of human presence in deep space, leading to brief encounters with the fleet's defensive ships. In both cases, the alien vessels had been disabled and allowed to escape with their crews. Unharmed, the encounters had sent clear messages to the Confederation leadership. The humans were alive and well. They were capable of defending themselves, and they had no interest in returning to their former lives as servants. The psychological impact of these encounters on Confederation forces had been significant. Reports of advanced human technology and defensive capabilities had discouraged further search operations. The aliens were beginning to accept that the humans were gone forever. Seokjin led the engineering teams that maintained and improved the fleet's technology. Human science had advanced rapidly during their years of independence. Freed from the constraints and limitations imposed by Confederation oversight, the improvements were remarkable. Human ships were faster, more efficient, and more reliable than anything the aliens had built. Life support systems were more sustainable, manufacturing processes were more flexible, and communication networks were more sophisticated. Most importantly, human technology was designed to be maintained by its users. Unlike Confederation systems that required specialist technicians, human equipment could be repaired and modified by anyone with basic training. The humans had learned the dangers of technological dependency. The engineering advances were shared freely throughout the human-allied network. Independent species received technology transfers that helped them develop their own capabilities and reduce their dependence on imperial powers. This approach had created a virtuous cycle. As more species gained technological independence, they became more capable of resisting imperial control. The network of free peoples grew stronger while the centralized empires